Hey guys, welcome to FPP Labs Radio. My name is Jim, KN4YCD, and today I want to go over some things we touched on in the last video. I want to go over the individual DMR modes. We're going to hit the big three for sure, DMR, DStar, and Fusion. And I'm going to mention NXDN and P25, which are not nearly as common. Stick around. See you in a minute. Okay guys, so the other day we did a basic setup on this new hotspot here, and we just did the initial setup. So what I want to do today in this video, I want to kind of walk you through individual settings for DStar, DMR, and System Fusion, and then I'm going to talk a minute or two about NXDN and P25. We're just going to skip through those pretty quick. They're not real common around here in the United States. NXDN is more popular, I believe, in Europe, and P25 is just very spotty on its usage. There are repeaters for that, but not a lot of them, and therefore not a lot of P25 radios. Anyway, so this is my System Fusion hotspot here, and some of these settings now will vary. This is the basic setup. Again, the same page that we looked at on our blank hotspot, except this is one that I already have set up. So I've got my DMR ID is in here. Now once you select the mode, then you're going to get some additional dialog boxes for the various things. So at one point I had used this apparently for DMR, so my DMR ID is in there. That's not normally going to be there for System Fusion, and it doesn't matter. So this is our basic settings, my latitude, lon, all that we went through the other day. APRS, so on and so forth. And so the biggest thing here with System Fusion is what startup host you want the hotspot to come up on. And you can set this to anything. This list is updated off of the Pi-Star website. And as you can see, there are any number of YSF rooms available. I mean, hundreds, certainly tens. And crossovers to XLX reflectors and different countries, FCS rooms, so on and so forth. So you just basically pick which one you want it to come up on. I normally have mine on Alabama Link. Obviously, the last time I was testing with it, I probably put it on Parrot. But it doesn't, whatever you want. And the way Fusion works, you'll be able to change this room if you want through the hotspot as well. So it's just a matter of picking whatever room you want the hotspot to start up on. And I'm just going to leave it on Parrot for now. In some cases, you need to turn on the uppercase of host files. This is for some specific Yaesu radios, and I cannot remember which ones. If you turn it on, it doesn't hurt anything, and it may fix some problems. I want to say it's with the FTD 100, possibly. I have an FT70D, and it doesn't matter to that. And similar with the WiresX pass-through, I haven't noticed any difference with that. Possibly that's the way that it can connect to rooms. WiresX only goes to Yaesu radios with like an FTD 100 with a HRI unit. This allows you to pass some traffic through to actual wires rooms, I believe. Again, I've never messed with this because I haven't needed to for anything. I think I turned it on once. It didn't change anything, the way anything worked here, so I just left it alone. And typically, if you're going to be using a hotspot, you're not going to be using a WiresX room. Unless you need to connect to one, I guess. I don't know. This is not something I've ever played with a whole lot. Like I said, with my FT70D, this setting works perfectly. And, you know, the other settings are the same that we've had. Now, one thing you can do on almost all the modes, you can jump into the expert mode and go tinker with individual settings. So if I jump to YSF Gateway, here are some additional settings that I can change. Some of these are the same that we've already set in the main dialogues. Some of these are in-depth settings that you can use to tweak the operation. So, for example, you can run your own YSF reflector, for example, on a Raspberry Pi. You may want to run it on a different port or change it in some way. You can set all those ports here. These are also ports that are used by the different modes to connect back to the Pi. I've never tinkered with any of these. This is in-depth you know, not 101 kind of stuff, so don't fool with it unless you absolutely need to, and then you need to understand what you're doing with it. So these are the settings for YSF. Jumping over to my next hotspot. This one is my DMR hotspot. All of these are set up the same way, simplex mode, an mmdvmhost. This one is VHF. So again, the basic settings, the correct modem for it. And I'm going to the DMR Gateway. I have my ESS ID set, which is my my DMR ID. The color code that I want the hotspot to be on, which is typically going to be 1. That's what it defaults to. You can certainly change it. It's your hotspot. If you want to use color code 56, knock yourself out. But it's going to default to 1 and it works fine. Again, GPS config, if you have that, all the other same settings. If we go to the expert mode on this one, then we have the DMR Gateway settings. Now, depending on how you set up DMR, you could have a lot of things to set up here. So there's settings for connecting to the XLX network. DMR Network 1, this is Brandmeister on mine. I'm not using DMR Network 2 because, as you can see, it's disabled. And you can actually put in up to 3 separate DMR networks. So with the DMR Gateway, that lets you select multiples at one time. So you could use TGIF and Brandmeister, for example, something like that. And that's about the basic settings for DMR. Again, it's none of this is really complicated. If you've gotten the hotspot set up to the screen we walked through the other day in my last video, then you're home free. You actually don't really need to tinker with pretty much any of this to have it working. All right, the other screen I want to show you is the DStar one. And again, it's much the same thing. I've selected the DStar mode here. This is particularly a UHF hotspot. Similar to Yaesu, I can tell the DStar config what reflector I want it to default on. The RPT1 call sign is going to be B in this case for UHF, and then the 2 is going to be G for gateway functionality. I'm coming up on XRF 334 Bravo, which is going to be Alabama link, and that's my default. Of course, I got my language set to US. And with DStar, I can get time announcements, call sign routing, and I can also use D+. So I have all that enabled. Not that anyone ever call sign routes a call to me. I would probably pass out if that actually happened, but it is available. This particular one has GPS turned on it. I'm not even sure why I did that because this does not have a GPS on it, so I'm going to actually turn that off while we're sitting here. I might have been having an adult beverage when I set this up. It's a possibility. And so the Pi-Star, if you'll notice up here in the tab, is twirling. And it's sitting and thinking, and until it finishes that, it's going to kind of sit there. But we'll jump back over here. So those are the basic settings for those modes. The Pi-Star software, as you see, supports a whole bunch of different modes and some gateways. So the big 3, DMR, DStar, YSF. It supports P25. There are 2 kinds of P25, Phase 1 and Phase 2. Phase 2 is now in use mostly in the United States by public safety, fire departments, police, EMS, more fire and police than anything else. P25 is very similar to DMR. I believe one of my first video or second video was all about P25 and how to program a P25 radio. It sets up exactly like DMR. It truly does. NXDN is also very similar to DMR. DMR and NXDN and P25 are all first cousins and very, very comfortably close first cousins. There's a few slight similarities between those 3 modes, but they're all basically the same. The biggest difference is what codec is used for voice modulation, because I believe the P25 uses the AMBI codec and the other 2 don't use that one. I may be wrong on that. I know it's a different codec. I just can't remember the name right off the top of my head. You also have gateway functionality. So if you only have a System Fusion radio and you're jonesing to talk on a DMR talk group, you can turn on that functionality in the Pi-Star software and use your Fusion radio to talk to DMR talk groups. And that includes anything on TGIF or Brandmeister or whatever DMR network you may want to jump onto. Same with NXDN and P25. Exactly the same. So you can use your System Fusion radio to go straight across to those modes. That's built into the Pi-Star software. And conversely, if you have a DMR radio and you've got a Jones for a System Fusion room, then you can turn on DMR to Fusion and go that way. You can also do DMR to NXDN and go that way. I didn't mention this the other day. If you have a hotspot that has a display, this is where you're going to set the display type, either an OLED, Nextion, serial port, LCD, whatever, and then what port it's on and what layout for the Nextions. But that's pretty much it. I really feel that these are fairly straightforward. There's just not much to it. The hardest part is sitting through how slow Pi-Star can be to respond sometime. And a bit of that is a function of the actual Pi itself, the Raspberry Pi. This one, which I just turned off GPS on, is a 3B+. This is my DStar hotspot. This particular Pi-Star, which is my DMR one, is a 3B+ as well. And then I believe this one is a 4. If I click the right thing, there we go. Oh, no, that's a 2. So this is, again, this goes back to what I was talking about the other day. The Pi-Star software will run on any Raspberry Pi that there is out there. This is a Pi 2. This is old. This is probably, I'd say at least a 3 or 4 year old platform, hardware platform, if not 4 or 5. And then the one that we started to set up that I didn't finish, we just walked through it. This is a Pi 0. So a Rev 11 Pi 0 with 512 mega memory. So this is not a high-end Raspberry Pi. This is pretty much, there is a Nano, and I don't have a Nano. I'm pretty sure this would run on a Nano as well, as long as you can get the mmdvm hat for the Nano. So the basic setup is not super complicated. Honestly, it's everything you'd know. If you're going to do DMR, you have a DMR ID. You know, System Fusion and DStar just require your call sign. There's no special thing there, except you have to register to get on the DStar network, and nothing for Fusion at all. The other thing that I would mention with regards to the Pi-Star software and setting these up, after you get it set up in basic working, one thing you may want to look at is you may want to go into mmdvmhost. All right. And in mmdvmhost, there are many ways that you can make this not work. And there are settings that you can use to tweak this. The biggest thing that you'll see with a hotspot, short of a bad internet connection on your side or the receiving party's side, which is very hard to debug, is all the mmdvm boards are going to generally have a transmit and receive offset that you may need to tweak. On a lot of the boards, the better ones, they will mark what the offset is supposed to be. So this is where you'd set the receive and transmit offset. And if you don't have that marked, what you're looking at is on the transmissions, and I don't have any activity on this one. Let's jump over here and see if I can find one with some activity going on. Of course not what I wanted. There we go. So this is a horrible amount of signal loss here. This probably indicates a bad internet connection. And if I sat down and went through the times, I would see that it's probably fairly close together. And Spectrum Internet some days here is just very sketchy. So this kind of indicates internet connection going in and out. BER is bit error rate, and that is what you're adjusting when you set up that transmit and receive offset under Expert mmdvmhost. Because what you're going to do is you're going to go down to these settings, the transmit and receive offset. and tweak them by 25 or 50 at a time. And what you really want to do is have two tabs open, one with your main screen on it, your dashboard up, and then the other screen with this, so you can make a change and then jump over to your dashboard screen, do a test transmission, and see what your BER, your bit error rate, looks like. And you want that to be very low. Under 1% is best, but you can generally live with 2%, 3% if you have to. But it's a matter of tinkering. It's a matter of playing with these. Generally start with the receive offset. And what that is adjusting the difference in the radio, your radio's receive frequency, which we're going to assume is spot on because it's an official ham radio, versus the possibly sketchy frequency utilization on the Raspberry Pi side, because that mmdvm board may not be exactly tuned as well as your HT is, or whatever radio you're using. So that's the difference between those two, and you just have to mess with it until you get that BER down below 1%, and you definitely want to shoot for less than 1%. It will work, but the higher that number is, and it's a very logarithmic curve, the worse your transmissions are going to sound, and the more problems you'll have hearing people as well. So that is the biggest thing that you're going to have to ever tinker with in the expert settings. There's a lot of other things that that we could talk about, and again, here's in specific settings for Fusion and DMR and P25, so on and so forth. And some of these have to do with the way those modes work. There's a lot of things in here, like I said, that you don't need to tinker with unless you have a specific mission in mind to tinker with those. Also, settings for the different screen types, whether you want the screen inverted or rotated in any way, the brightness on the screen, scrolling functionality, so on and so forth. And that's going to be dependent on whether you even have a screen on your Pi. I have 2 Pis with a screen. Sorry about that pop. 2 Pis with a screen. I honestly could care less about either one of them 99% of the time. I had set up a NextGen screen, one of the bigger NextGen screens for one of mine, and I just never even cared about it. It was just more stuff to have to mess with, and I just took it apart because I didn't have a case for the Pi, and there's a lot of fiddling around. I've seen a lot of nice Pi-Star hotspot setups with the screens on them, where they've got the screen integrated in a case. And if you're going to do a screen, I'd recommend that. So that covers that as much as I want to get into in this video. But here's your different expert settings for all the different modes. At its heart, this is a Linux machine, so it does Linux things as well. You have SSH access to the machine, command line access to the machine. The CSS tool is nice. Let's copy. I think that's the one I want because I like blue. And let's jump over to that one and go to configuration and go to expert and go to CSS tool and paste in the color code for what I copied and update. So you can tinker with all the colors on the background. And there's, 8 or 9 settings there to put on there. You also have, which we talked about the other day, backup and restore. So again, anytime you make a change of any significance, you're going to want to click this and download. And it downloads it in a zip file. So download it, park it in a folder somewhere, and don't mess with it. And if you ever need to rebuild your Pi from scratch, you have a snapshot of it. And that's some of the best advice I could give you, because after you spend all that time tweaking your settings, especially the transmit and receive offset, get everything working just like you want, it would be terrible if your $12 SD card died and you had to start all over from scratch. But if you're smart, you're going to grab a download, and then all you have to do is reburn the image and go from there. All right, guys, that's it for today. I'd appreciate it if you would click that like button. Make sure if you're not a subscriber to please subscribe to the channel, and please click that bell so you can get notified when I post any new content. Thanks a lot, guys. 73.